Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Career Diaries by Elamed, the podcast dedicated to talking about careers in the medtech industry. And today, I'm really excited because we've been organising this for so long, I finally got Donielle Johnson on the show. Donielle is Executive Director, Global Head of Regulatory Affairs for Medical Devices at Bausch Health. What a title, Donielle. That's a mouthful.
I know. And the sad part about it is I think at the end of the month, it's going to change.
Oh my goodness me. Well, that was probably one of the longest titles I've ever introduced. But no, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So today, when we were thinking about sort of what angle to sort of go with, there was something that you touched on when you were talking at RAPS Convergence on the session that you were featured on, and it sort of came out about your why, and I thought it was such an interesting story, and I'd love to sort of lean more into that and talk a little bit about how you found your why and why that's important. But before we get there, maybe you could just give a brief summary of sort of who you are and what you do.
So I'm Donielle Johnson. As you can tell by my accent, I'm American, born and raised in New Orleans. From New Orleans, I currently reside in Amsterdam. I've been in Amsterdam almost 8 years. So January will be 8 years that I've been living in Europe. I cannot believe the time has flown. My background's in chemistry. Have an undergraduate degree from Howard University. I went to grad school at the University of Southern California. I've been in med devices probably 15, 18 years, somewhere in there. I think I've lost track of the time. Most of that spent in regulatory. You know, I actually started my career as an intern and did a little clinical work. Jumped to regulatory because someone said, with my brain in my mouth, I needed to be in regulatory. So that was advice I got probably back in 2006, which I think leans into my why, because at the time my mother was very sick. She had passed away at the end of 2006, and I just needed a fresh start. And so I took a role in regulatory and moved to another city, started all over. Fun fact about me, I'm a classically trained ballet dancer. I did ballet for about 15 years. I love to travel. I drink champagne just because. I love opera. It's one of my favorite things to do is go see an opera. And my dream trip is to the Sydney Opera House. I haven't been yet. It's one of my dream trips. I want to don black tie and go see an opera at the Sydney Opera House.
Bucket list. That sounds really, really exciting. So, wow, I mean, clearly well-rounded individual with a lot of interesting facts, because I didn't know the thing about ballet, but I was also trained in tap. I did ballet and tap, but I did 15 years of tap dancing. So that's normally my one that I pull out. But that's really interesting. So with your brains and your mouth, you had to go into regulatory affairs. So what is it that makes a good regulatory professional then?
So I think for me, what I believe is that it's someone who can understand complex scientific things and explain them to people that don't know your products, right? A good regulatory person can take a brand new product and get it approved because they were able to translate the proper requirements to the engineers. And then they were also able to translate the work that the engineers did to the Ministry of Health or the competent authority or whatever, regulatory agency you're working with. We're the conduit, I feel like, right? And so for me, you have to understand the science, but you also have to have great negotiation skills. I find this role to be a mixture of like law and science.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting that negotiation piece, because when I first started recruiting regulatory, sort of like nearly 10 years ago now, things like negotiation and communication skills, they weren't really something that I found companies talking about a lot, like it was very much focused on sort of like knowledge and expertise and a great regulatory professional maybe has worked, in R&D before, or, sort of like more technical. But now I have to say almost every conversation, when I'm talking to companies and we're recruiting regulatory, they always talk about the importance of soft skills like communication, negotiation. Why do you think that is?
Well, because you're with the product along the entire life cycle, and there's so many different stakeholders that have so many different experiences, whether it be technical or from a communications perspective. And in my role, I work globally. So I also work across cultures. So I think you have to be able to talk to people in their language, so to speak, right? So it's very important, especially also too, because we're reading complex regulations and trying to break them down into digestible pieces for our stakeholders. Or we're reading complex regulations and trying to break it down to the ministries of health as to why this isn't going to work, or why this may have a negative impact on their patient population.
I think it's clearly really important for someone to just be able to understand that bigger picture as well, right? It's not just like the technical piece, but and also understanding the different personalities that you deal with. Critical, right?
There is definitely a cast of characters involved, in this role, which I think one of the reasons I love it. No 2 days are ever the same. Even when I'm dealing in the same project, no 2 days are ever the same. No two ministries of health are ever the same. They all, I always tell people the regulations are black and white, but we have to also learn how to read and play in the shades of gray. And that's where the negotiation skills come in. That's where the soft skills come in, because there are a lot of ways sometimes that you can interpret that black and white.
You spoke about sort of working cross-culturally and globally. And I think for as long as I've known you, you've been dipping in and out of different countries, right? You used to, both physically, traveling all over the world, but also in terms of the scope of the role that you have, which adds that extra layer of complexity to what it is to be a regulatory professional, right? When you're dealing not only with different regulations, different countries, different requirements, but then different personalities, different languages. How do you go about, I mean, just I'm throwing this at you, Donielle, but how do you go about sort of understanding those cultural differences when you're working in a global role?
So I like to use what I know that connects people. And for me, it's food. I love to cook and I love to eat. We all have to eat every day, right? To live. So I try to find things that can connect me to someone, to gain their trust, to build relationships, to build a rapport. And a lot of times that happens over tea, coffee, food, dinner, wine. And that's how I try to connect. I try to use things that are universal and that are genuine. Like I genuinely love to cook. I genuinely love to eat. So, I mean, I try to find things that can connect us. Also, too, for me, one of the biggest things is we go back once again to our collective why. And for me, our collective why, whether you're at a company or whether you're at a ministry of health, is how do we get safe and effective devices to your patients in a timely manner? To me, that's a huge vision and purpose of not just the companies, but the regulators. Now, we may have other things behind those whys or different reasons behind those whys, but there still are shared whys. So I think if you look globally, how do you connect? Is you look at what your shared whys is. I always start building relationships over food, and then I continue to build that rapport over our shared whys. We may have different ways on how we're going to get there, but we all want to get there. Safe, effective products to patients in a timely manner.
So before we dig into the why piece, maybe could you just define for me, what is a why?
So when I say what is my why, it's my purpose, right? I always tell people it's kind of my personal mission statement. I have two models that I live by. One is my leadership model of we win and lose as a team. Always. My team knows, I always try to emphasize this to my teams. We win and lose as a team. That is my leadership motto. My personal motto, my grandma instilled this into me a long time ago. To whom much is given, much is required. So someone helped me get to where I am today. And it is now my job to dig back down and help someone else. That's why I believe in mentoring. That's why I believe in talent development. That's why I believe in investing in my teams, because someone did that for me. So for me, that is what your why is. It's your purpose. What draws you? What makes you get out of bed every day? There is something except the alarm clock that wakes you up in the morning and says, you know what? I'm ready to tackle the day, whatever that may be. And a lot of times it's the driving force behind you. It's your why.
But why would you say I mean, why is that important? Why is it important to actually have clarity around that purpose?
So if we think about it, we spend more time at work. If you look at the amount of hours in the day, the amount of time we all work, we spend more hours at work than we probably spend at home with our friends and family. Yes, some of us make really good money, and that's great. But at the end of the day, is money really a driving force for you? And for me, it's not. It's not enough. I want to make sure that I'm doing something that has a purpose. I want to make sure that I'm continuing to better myself. I want to make sure that I'm leaving a mark on this world. I think that's the easiest way I can say it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about purpose, you know, with the stuff that Simon Sinek, for example, has done, and it starts with why, and I think that that's really important, because it's not just about money, is it? Ultimately, it's about what sort of legacy do you leave as well, and what do you want to be known for? What is it that makes you do what you do ultimately? So
I think we're seeing that now with the whole, I think they keep calling it the Great Resignation.
Yes.
Where the pandemic has shown that people don't just care about money. They've realized that they can live these balanced lives, especially Americans who don't really understand work-life balance. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I love living in Europe is because Europeans, they work so that they can live. I feel like a lot of Americans live to work. Mm-hmm. You know, I think I read a meme the other day that said, retirement age is 68 and life expectancy age is 79. So you work for 40 some years just to have 11 years potentially of freedom. And I only think that that's an American mentality, right? I mean, I see people, it's a school holiday week here in the Netherlands. People are taking that time, even though the weather's crap, even though it's COVID, even if they're just staying home, playing with their kids at home. They're understanding and taking that time. So I think when we look at like stuff like the Great Resignation, people are realizing I can do other things besides just work. I can do other things besides just these paychecks. You're seeing people starting passion projects and turning them into businesses. So I feel like more and more people are following their why. They're quitting their 9 to 5 because they're able to find their purpose. Companies laid people off, you know, in the beginning of COVID, and people had to figure out how they were going to pay their bills. And a lot of them turned into entrepreneurs, and they're loving it so much that now that companies need them to come back, they're struggling to find people to hire. Because these people are realizing I can be my own boss, make my own schedule, and I'm doing something that I love. I mean, I think we have to redefine, especially in America, how we work.
So flexibility is something that we've seen on the up and up, right? Like every conversation we have with candidates is like, okay, so like what flexibility does the company offer? That's something that seems to be, you know, really on people's minds, and critical, because it's this idea of fitting work around you and your life and being able to sort of do both. But as a regulatory professional then for you, so tell me about your journey of discovery. Like, how did you find your why?
So unfortunately, mine is a bit of a sad tale. In 1993, my father passed away. He was killed in a car accident by a drunk driver. The same year, I was 13 years old. The same year, my mother had a routine surgery to remove an overactive thyroid and had a blood transfusion during the surgery and was given tainted blood. And she ended up with hepatitis C. Years went by and she didn't know that she had hepatitis C. She just was getting sick and just mostly tired all the time. After seeing 50 million specialists, in 1997, she was diagnosed with hepatitis C, which at the time there was no cure for. So she was placed on a liver transplant list. And she stayed on that list until 2005. In 2005, the week that Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, my mother got a new liver. So we thought, great, we're out of the woods, things are going great. Because of the hurricane and how the health insurance works, I moved my mom with me to Minnesota, and the insurance company considered her to be out of network. And so they wouldn't cover, some of her medications, and transplant drugs are expensive. And I wasn't, the financially stable person that I am today. So it was a long journey. By the time we cut through the bureaucracy and the red tape, she needed another liver transplant because the hepatitis was back and it was attacking her liver. One of the things I looked at in the meantime, I guess, was there was a clinical trial that was going. I eventually worked for Abbott, who actually had one of the first, I think it was the first drug that cured hepatitis C. At the time, I was not working for Abbott, but I tried to get my mom in the clinical trial. And she met one of the exclusion criteria. So they excluded her from the study. That was 2006. 2011, I joined Abbott. My mom died in 2006. 2007 or 8, I think, the drug got FDA approval. And I joined Abbott in 2011. And what I realized on that journey of my why is there was a lot of bureaucracy in the conversation to get that drug approved. And I always wonder, had certain things been done differently, had things been done quicker and faster, would she have gotten that drug and would it have saved her life? I know what it felt like, I think. I was 28 years old when I lost my mother. I was 13 when I lost my father and 28 when I lost my mother. And it hurt so much. And I tell people grief comes in waves. So even all of these years later, my birthday is the day after my birthday is the day before my mother's. So I always get that wave. My mom died around Christmas. So I always get that wave, right? I'm up for promotion that I hope I get. And the first person I always think about, want to pick up the phone and call, is my mother. So that grief comes in waves. And so I always think about, if there's anything that I can do to make sure a product gets to the market so someone else doesn't have to go through what I went through, that's my driving force. That is my why. I watched my nephew grow. He just graduated from university in May, and he was 5 when my mom died. And they were so close. And I'm watching all these milestones that she missed, right? And I don't want someone else to go through that. So it's a sad story, but every morning that I wake up, every day that I have a conversation about a product, especially we were having a conversation at work yesterday about a pediatric product that we're struggling a little bit with. And everybody's saying, we really need to do this. It's very important. These parents, don't have a good option. And I was on a call with the team till probably midnight trying to figure it out. Because I go back in my mind and I think about, if this was my mom, I would have gone to the ends of the earth to try to figure this out. And I didn't have the opportunity to save her, but how many other people will I have the opportunity to bring a therapy that will give them a chance at a better life or at a life-saving therapy? So that's my why. That's how I discovered my why. It is the driving force every day I wake up. Every time I'm frustrated, the regulations are changing all around the world. It's a lot of late nights, early mornings, trying to do virtual in this COVID world, which we, like you said, you're so used to seeing me on planes. That's because culturally, some countries just aren't well with virtual, right? They like, culturally, it's about respect, the face-to-face, and now we're trying to pivot. So, I'm stretching myself as far as I can because of my why. And I think I won't ever stop because of my why.
It's such a powerful story, Donielle. I mean, there's no words, but it's what an amazing story, it just puts everything into context. It's not about that paycheck.
No, for me, it's about much more. And I don't knock people that love their paycheck. And let's be clear, I have a nice paycheck. But it has to be more for me. So I tell people, for me, there's 3 things for me that make me enjoy a job outside of my why. There's 3 things. 1, am I contributing? Am I making a meaningful contribution to the company and the company's mission? So do I believe in it and I'm making a meaningful contribution? The second for me is the company investing in me, and I'm continuing to grow, because I'm one of those people, I'm like plants. You got to feed me, you got to water me so I can sprout. If not, I'm just going to die. So I have to be constantly challenged, constantly developed. And the last thing for me is, am I being paid a fair wage for the work that I do? We all, tangent aside, but there's women, that whole women paycheck gap, blah, blah, blah. I ask the uncomfortable question. What are the men in this role or in similar roles to me making? What's your pay band? And if I can't get what I consider, satisfactory answers to those questions, I feel like that the company might be hiding something, and it may just not be the company for me. Because I've had roles where I've taken roles in the past, and I find out that a man who didn't even have as much experience as me was making 50% more. Also, too, as women, we don't ask the question, and we don't negotiate money. I do. Mm-hmm. But once again, money is the last thing for me on that journey.
Yeah. But on that piece, that's a really, that's also something that, we can touch on here. Have you had situations in the past where you've actually discovered that for the same role, your counterparts that are male have been paid more?
Yep.
Have you ever experienced any other sort of, I don't know what you would call it, apart from,
Well, also, here's the thing. I think depending on, I hope this doesn't cause me but medical devices is a traditionally male, white dominated field. Mm-hmm. The numbers don't lie. Mm-hmm. And so I think more and more women are getting into great positions of, power, and, look at Ashley McEvoy at J&J. So you're seeing more and more women in executive positions. I have the pleasure of the general counsel at Bausch is a woman named Christina Ackerman, and she's amazing. She's recently taken me on as a mentee, so I'm very excited. So you're seeing more and more women come to power, but there's still that wage gap. And not even just that, it's the treatment gap. I think a lot of people expect women to be meek and mild. I'm one of these women that I can take it and give it just like you can give it and take it. Mm-hmm. I think I've had a previous experience where I felt like some of the men I worked with could treat me a certain way. But if I didn't go cry in the corner and I gave it back to them, it was a problem. Mm. It was well, how dare you talk to such and such like that? And I was like, well, how dare he talk to me like that? So, I think the expectation too sometimes is, the optics of a woman sitting around the table is good, but your voice can't be heard. And of course, I'm not shy and I want my voice to be heard. So I think we still have a long way to go for mm-hmm. women. And if I be honest, I'm a Black woman, that adds another layer of complexity to the dynamic. But I'm hopeful, with the Black Lives Matter movement, cultural diversity is no longer just becoming a slogan. Mm-hmm. Companies really have to lean into it. Mm-hmm. So I'm very hopeful that we're going to see some good change. And honestly, we were just talking about this earlier about the Great Resignation. Mm-hmm. You have that baby boomer generation that is retired. So a lot of these old white men are about to retire. So how have companies prepared themselves for that next step? Mm. And then I'm trying to figure out, what do I fit in there? Because I still got another 20 some years to work. I'm only 42. So
looking very good for your age, Donielle, I have to say as well.
A lot of moisturizer and water and good jeans.
I think it's really interesting. What would you like to see more of though? Like if we talk about sort of like D&I, just that agenda, what do you think companies need to do more of?
I actually would like to see us look at the non-traditional student. So if I think about regulatory affairs, when I joined regulatory affairs, there weren't all these fancy masters and now PhD programs in regulatory affairs. When my mentor at the time, Karen Root Jarman, said to me, with your brain in your mouth, you are in the wrong role. You should join regulatory affairs. She was the director of regulatory affairs at Medtronic in the cardiac rhythm disease management business. I was like embarrassed because I didn't even know what regulatory affairs was. So I didn't want to ask her. I went home and Googled it. And Northeastern University in Boston came up, and they offered a certificate program. So I read the curriculum and the syllabus, and I took the certificate program. And I was like, I actually think I like this. I could do this. But everybody's looking for regulatory people with tons of regulatory experience that went to these fancy schools, that got these fancy degrees. I'd like to see us look more so from a regulatory perspective. I'd like to pull in more people with political science degrees, people with communication degrees, people that probably didn't go to school, that maybe did military service because they probably worked in different cultures, people that were inventors because they probably understand complex. So I do think that for us, it's incestuous, right? We're pulling the same people. They're going back and forth to the same companies because we're all looking for this certain pool of people. I believe that anybody with drive and determination, I could probably teach them regulatory. So I really want to shake up my team. And so from a D&I perspective, I feel like if you're only going to look for that traditional role, you're going to continue to get those privileged people that could afford to go to college, that had money, that worked for these companies. You're going to miss out on probably diversity of thought and inclusion on your teams because everybody originally had that same role.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think especially that diversity of thought thing, which for me is really important. And, when the whole Black Lives Matter movement kind of came out, and, we were talking to a lot of companies as well around sort of, D&I and having more people on the leadership teams that fit XYZ quota, right? But I think it's also really important to make sure that you're building a varied team, not just in terms of optically, what does that look like on our website, but actually in terms of having dissenting voices of different backgrounds that maybe will tell you what you don't want to hear because they've had a different experience of something, because only that way do you truly get diversity in terms of thought, and diversity in terms of experience. And from a company perspective, that's where you have the rich diversity,
So it's so interesting when I'm interviewing candidates for roles, we always have the screening process where HR screens out candidates, and I always debrief with them and I say, oh, you had an interview with X, Y, and Z. How did it go? Oh, I wouldn't recommend them. They're not a cultural fit. Guess what? Those are the exact candidates I say, put them on my calendar. I want to talk to them because I don't understand this term of cultural fit. Because I think that means you put yourself in a box that can only include a certain amount of people, and that you may not include somebody because their thought process is different. And you may be missing out on good candidates. We have to stop interviewing for that cultural fit. Because if your company was diverse, then everyone is welcome and can fit culturally. So I never understand that. So every time an HR person says, well, they were okay, I just don't think they were a cultural fit, I'm the first one to say, well, I still want them to get on my calendar so I can talk to them. And I've moved people along in the process and I brought them in and they're doing amazing. That HR had said, oh, I wouldn't even waste my time with them. They're not a cultural fit. So I think we have to shift our minds and look internally also. We have to hold that mirror up in our face and say, what is our culture? What do we want our culture to be known as? And why would someone really not be a cultural fit for our company?
And also, why didn't I like that candidate that I just interviewed? Is it because they're not like me? Right? Because very often you hire the people that are the most similar to you, that think the same way that you do, because as humans, we're wired to sort of feel that synergy. And those are the people that intrinsically we like, and the people we don't are the ones that are different, think differently, react differently, speak differently. And I think that's also really important, that mirror piece, but also saying, what was it about that person that I didn't like? And check yourself.
Yeah, it's all about your own unconscious bias.
100%.
It's all about that. I will tell you, I'm a little bit of a different leader. So I was captain of my high school debate team, captain of my college debate team. If there is someone who is very different and actually challenges me, I'm signing them up immediately because I don't need a bunch of sheep. I tell my team, it's so funny. I have this whole rule that I rule by. I call it a constitutional monarchy. Everyone gets a voice, and then in the end, I have to make the decision. But I want to hear I want us to play devil's advocate in our decisions. I want to hear the dissent. If I'm talking, everybody's saying, we will never, get to a great place. Because I know I don't have all the best ideas. I have some good ones. But the whole point of having a team, once again, goes back to my motto. We win and lose as a team. So your team has to have diverse players from a cultural perspective and a diversity of thought perspective.
So if we go back to that initial topic that we were talking about, which is sort of like the why and the purpose. So I remember sort of when this started to become a discussion for ages, I was like, what is a why? What is the internet talking about? And then it was this whole thing of me waking up and going, oh my God, I haven't got a why, right? Because like you don't have that mission statement. And actually what you find, we did a really nice workshop and we recently found our company why. And we used a consultant to help us get it. And it was a really big experiential, we literally were out in the forest, dancing around a fire, banging a drum, letting go of, it was really, really cool. But the one thing that he kept talking about, which I thought was really interesting, was that your why is never discovered. It's more uncovered. It's one of these things that's always been there. And it's always been sort of like driving you. But very often it's so obvious and intrinsic to who you are and to why you do what you do that you don't see it. And so it just takes something to sort of uncover your why rather than discovering a why. What advice would you have for the people that are sort of like listening to this going, well, I don't really have a why. How can I find it?
No, I agree with you. I believe everyone has a why. It's there somewhere, and it's not something you're going to discover. Something is going to happen to you, or you're going to have that, what I call the aha moment. Mm-hmm. You're going to realize your why. I actually didn't discover my why till years of very expensive therapy after my mother died. Mm-hmm. Like I tell people this all the time. I think I turned my pain into work. Mm-hmm. So I didn't take time to really grieve. I went right back to work, hit the ground running. I mean, at my age, I climbed the ladder. People always ask me, like, how did I climb the ladder so quickly? Mm-hmm. And it's because I spent a lot of late nights and early mornings in the office because I didn't want to be home alone. Mm-hmm. And then I had a point in my life where I got sick myself, and I had to slow down. And I had to sit with my thoughts. And then I went to therapy. And my therapist said to me, do you think you work 12, 14, 15 hours a day just because you want to? And we went through a series of exercises over months that brought out my why. So I always tell people it could be as complex as that. It could be as simple as one day you see something happening out on the street and you're like, that's wrong. And I want to, grab it. It could be one day you wake up and you say, you know what, my passion really is beadwork. Why am I a lawyer? I'm going to start a jewelry line on the side, right? It's one of those things that when that aha moment hits you, it could be something minute that triggers it, or it could be something deep, painful, or deep joy that you uncover. But it's in there. Because if we didn't have a why, we wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. Even if your initial why is about money. Because some people, their why is money. But you get out of bed every day. So it's there. You just got to figure out how to uncover it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I really like that. So how has that helped you in your career though? So like as you've sort of moved through the ranks, worked your way up to executive director, I just wanted to say that, and hopefully soon.
Also.
How has having that clarity or that underlying why, how has that helped you actually in your career?
It's propelled me forward, right? It drives me on those hard days, really. That is like when you have something that is not going how you planned it to go, right? You have your product development process. You're like, yes, we're going to deliver this on this time. And then you fail a test. You're like, how did this test fail? You got to go back to the drawing board and you're like, my whole schedule's thrown off. And I start thinking about, we're not going to get this to market in a timely manner. We have to go back, and you're like, but we have to pause. We have to reflect, because I don't want to put a garbage product on the market and then have to recall it. I want a good product on the market. So I go back to my why, right? It drives me back to that, especially on those hard days. So I think that has helped me in my career because I'm stubborn and I don't give up. I believe that there is always a way to make a way. I don't take no lightly. So, I think that is how I think my why drives me. I've also taken the assignments that other people didn't want. Part of my just natural ability or my natural being is I want a challenge. So I think all of those things, plus I've always been a student. I'm always learning. Regulations are always changing. I have to have a change mindset. I have to strategically be able to bring new ideas to the table. And I think I've successfully done that. I've also successfully navigated spaces that women, especially Black women, haven't navigated before. And I don't know if it's because we were scared, if we didn't have a seat at the table. I'm not waiting for you to give me a seat at the table. I'll stand. I'll bring my own seat. And I think that just that tenacity and that push and power behind my why is why I have been so successful. And it hasn't come easy. I don't want anyone to think that this has come easy. This has been a lot of hard work, a lot of late nights and early mornings. And still, we had our quarterly business review on Friday. I worked Friday morning. I started Friday morning at 7 a.m. with a call in China with my China team. I ended Friday night at midnight on a quarterly business review call with our CEO. So just as you climb the ladder, it doesn't get easy. There are easier days, but it's still hard days as well. And it's how you weather those storms, I think, that people see and say, okay, they have the emotional intelligence to continue to go. They have the drive, they have the knowledge. The fact that I'm respected in my company for my expertise as well is a driver, right? It's one of the reasons I'm being considered for the promotion that's available.
So really, I think you've touched on so many interesting points around your why, how you find your why, what your why is. I know that you're somebody who always is trying to learn new things and be open-minded to different approaches. What's for you, random question, quick fire question, best book that you've ever read?
Oh, so, wow, best book I've ever read. Okay, so this is a crazy one. It's called What Looks Like Crazy on an Ordinary Day.
Okay.
And it's by Pearl Cleavage, I think. And it's about two sisters. And I have a sister, I have a younger sister, right? And they're very different. And it's about their journey. I think it was a book that I read a long, long time ago that kind of helped me reflect on the kind of the relationship and the dynamic I have with my sister, because we're complete opposites. So I think from a personal kind of perspective, it's probably one of my favorite books. From a professional perspective, The Four Agreements. Have you read The Four Agreements?
No.
So it's about kind of like the struggle internally with yourself and how you make these proper agreements that better help you as a leader or better help you understand, your leadership capabilities.
I'll definitely have to check that one out. I haven't heard that one yet. So yeah, really, really interesting. Best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Only be you.
Mm-hmm.
You can show up every day, but be your authentic self. And some will love you, some won't. People come in your life for reasons and seasons. You have to determine which one they are. So I can only always be my authentic self. And that goes for personal relationships, business relationships as well. If you don't like my authentic self, if I don't fit into your culture, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was one of the best pieces of advice that someone told me is like, you know your worth, your capabilities. Don't try to fit into somebody else's idea of who and what you should be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And I tell that to my mentees all the time. There are lots of other people out there in the world. You're the only you. Be you.
Mm-hmm.
And those that value you and see that value, those that don't, it's okay.
It's really simple advice, but it's so hard to do, isn't it? Don't you think?
Oh, I think it is. I think because society has told us we're supposed to act a certain way, dress a certain way. I remember during the pandemic, like I'm acting like we're still not in a pandemic, but when we were all always working from home, I had one of my employees that never wanted to turn on the camera. And I realized I wasn't turning on my camera because I was wearing my curly natural hair. And I said, why am I afraid to go on camera with my team, with my curly fro, my natural, because I can't go to the salon and get it blow dried and flat ironed. When you wet this, it just becomes a massive curl poof. And I started saying, you know what, I have to love, just simply, I have to love that. So I got up every morning and I wet it and I just let it be. And I would, every time I'd have a meeting with my team, I'd turn on my camera. Some days I'd be in my, what I call my comfortable work sweats. And I would turn on the camera, right? To have that connection with them. And I think more and more people then started turning on their cameras, right? I had team members that had kids at home. I don't mind if little Johnny's running around in the background. Part of who you are is you're also a parent. School is closed. I understand that, even though I don't have any kids, I understand that. And so I think people, when they see a leader leading by example of those kinds of things, they feel like they have that permission to be themselves. So I try to be myself with my team. Yeah, I can't be anybody else.
Yeah, it's about also creating that, leading by example and creating that space, right? Yeah. For it to be okay. You know, I think that's really important. So if you were to sort of like go back to, I don't know, 21-year-old Donielle Johnson at the start of her career, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger self?
Make time to play. Don't be so serious. I think, you know, I graduated at 21 and went straight into graduate school. I wish I would have just taken some time. I mean, you know, I love how Europeans do like gap years and additional years. That's not something that we really talk about in the US. It's like, my parents were like, okay, you graduate from high school, where you going to college? You graduate from college, you going to grad school, you're getting a job, what's next? I think we're so in a rush. I really wish I would have taken some time to play. And I still think I would have gotten here had I done that, right? I don't think I would have been any less of where I'm at today, but I really wish I would have taken some time. I mean, I think I touched on it. I'm 42. I'm not married. I don't have any kids. Shoot, I'm not even dating. But that's because I never really took time to play, I should say. And that's one of the biggest reflections. You know, one of the reasons I kind of left my previous job is I was like, I need some time. And then the pandemic hit and I was just, okay, I can't even talk to people. I'm living by myself. So, you know, I ended up getting back into the workforce. But I do notice that I take more time for myself, right? Every quarter I use some of my vacation. I took 10 days at the end in July for my birthday and I went to Greece. I'm going to Champagne, France next month for my quarterly vacation this quarter. So, you know, taking more time to play, smell the roses, stop. Just everything can't be about the grind. Mm-hmm. You have to find that balance. You have to create that because no one else will create that for you. So I think if I could go back and tell 21-year-old me that, I would say that. And I would say getting the regulatory back then because no one knew what it was. So you could probably write your own ticket.
So I've got one last big question for you, Donielle.
Okay.
Ready?
Yes.
What's the legacy that you want to leave on the world?
Ooh, that is a big one. But you know what? I'm going to make it simple. She came, she saw, she conquered, she inspired. That would be it. You know, I lived every day giving it 100%. I know a lot of people say I lived every day like it was going to be my last. I want to live every day like I'm going to have another one tomorrow. But I want to make sure that I lived kind of every day inspired. So I want people to know that I may have worked really hard. I conquered a lot of things. I saw a lot of things. I mean, I've been to places I never thought I would ever go, like the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. You know, I've been there twice.
Wow.
Saudi Arabia, Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa, Vietnam, Philippines, Japan, India, Antarctica. I mean, I have been so many places, so I've seen a lot. And I want people to know I think that I cared. So if I had a legacy, it would be those things.
Very powerful words, Donielle. And I have to say, I always knew that it was going to be a pleasure to do this with you, but it was honestly one of the most interesting conversations that I've had. So thank you so much for dedicating the time to this podcast series.
Well, I'm so happy that you had me. I know we get to chat. We run into each other in crazy places around the world. I know we haven't seen each other face to face because of the pandemic, but I really appreciate you having me. It's been really fun. I love to do these things. It's part of I consider also part of mentoring, because I hope I've inspired someone else to find their why. I hope I've inspired someone else to dig deep and maybe even change direction. I hope I've inspired somebody maybe to join regulatory. I mean, EUMDR, we're always looking for people. I know. So you make that plug. I mean, you're a recruiter. I was just talking to you before we joined. It's help me find someone in Switzerland. So I really enjoyed it. I always do. So I'm glad we got the chance to chat.
Thanks, Donielle. So for all of you listening today, don't forget to give it a like, a thumbs up, a comment, connect with Donielle, connect with me, and stay tuned. In a couple of weeks, we'll be launching another episode of Career Diaries by Elamed. Thank you and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.